It's that spooky, scary time of the year again. Yep, Halloween. You know, a couple years ago, I decided that I was going to work with my buddy, who also happens to be a scientist and my psychologist, Dr. Albert Light. Together, we decided we were going to create a clone of me so that I would be able to create content a little bit more efficiently. Well, I'm proud to announce that after all the kinks have been worked out, we have ourselves a clone. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be part of the skits you all loathe to watch. This has already received a downvote as we speak. Now, some of you may have noticed some slight differences between myself and my clone here. Nah, dude, you're the clone. Am I? Well, let's keep everyone guessing for the time being. I keep telling you, you're the clone. Ugh, that's it! Are we doing this? I've always wanted to do this. Is the rumor that Succubus's portrait art from Symphony of the Night is loosely based design-wise on Sharon Tate's character Sarah Chagall from the classic horror movie The Fearless Vampire Killers? Go on. Is Grant Dynasty a thief or a pirate? Keep going. In Castlevania Judgment...
Whoa! What do you think you're doing?
Shut it down!
That's it!
Yeah! Whoa, what are you doing? That's my light.
Oh, yeah? Oh, crap.
Ugh, these guys. Hey, it's Dan and Pat from Console Wars!
Hey, you can't just steal our shtick and get away with it.
Yeah, tell him, Steve Dave.
What have I told you about doing Kevin Smith quotes in the middle of cameos? Come on, man.
I keep forgetting. Either way, man, you can't just steal our thing for clicks and think it's cool.
It's not so much copying as it is an homage. Besides, we've been doing skit-based videos for well over a decade. And it's either this or I go back to doing those silly fake Manscaped ads.
Those ads were fake? No wonder I haven't been getting any razors. Well, you can't steal our shtick. Get a new gimmick.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry, guys.
Typical New Englander. Between this and Tom Brady leaving, must be chaos up there.
Yeah, 18-1. Go Giants!
Hey, we ain't all into the Patriots up here. Go Packers. Okay, are they gone? I think so. Best 16-bit Richter Belmont game.
Aw, come on! He still hasn't learned his lesson. What's he gonna do next? Say rock and roll racing's better for Sega Genesis?
For real, because we both know it's better for Super Nintendo.
What? That's it! Are we doing this?
In 1993, there were 3 entries of the Castlevania series in development for a variety of platforms, and surprisingly, none of them were Nintendo consoles or handhelds. Previously, the Castlevania games were exclusive to Nintendo platforms, but now Konami was spreading its bat wings to try to bring the Belmonts to other competing alternatives. The franchise was expanding, with Castlevania Bloodlines on the Sega Genesis, Akamajo Dracula X 68000, later known as Castlevania Chronicles to Western audiences, and Akamajo Dracula X Chi no Rondo. To understand why this game, translated as Rondo of Blood to Westerners, was left in the East, we really have to go back to the beginning to find out what system was chosen for its release. Castlevania Rondo of Blood was released on the PC Engine's Super CD-ROM 2 on October 29, 1993. The game boasted new features to the franchise, all because of the enhancements of the machine it was developed for, which would help bring Castlevania into a more advanced place in the gaming world. Konami decided to utilize the PC Engine CD add-on to create the first ever Castlevania game on a CD-based system. This would allow for more detailed sprites, anime cutscenes, and a Redbook audio CD-based soundtrack. The Super CD-ROM 2 bolstered more RAM than the standard PC Engine and CD add-on, and was considered an upgrade to the BIOS of the original PC Engine CD. The Super CD-ROM 2 was released in 2 formats, with the first being a physical HuCard ROM upgrade called the Super System Card. By plugging into the slot of the PC engine with the CD-ROM 2 add-on attached, the system would be automatically upgraded to the higher ROM and BIOS. Secondly, this was also released as a combined piece of hardware called the PC Engine Duo. NEC's PC Engine did extremely well in Japan, unlike the North American version, the TurboGrafx 16. Growing up in North America around this time, you either had a Nintendo-based console or a Sega, though it makes me wonder why the game didn't make its way onto the Sega CD. This leads me to believe that it truly was some sort of exclusivity agreement between NEC and Konami, but I suppose we'll never know the truth on that matter.
Aren't we gonna tell the good people about the 32X port that never came for Rondo of Blood? Wait, what?
Yes! Rondo of Blood was announced during the June 23, 1994 Summer Consumer Electronics Show to be ported to the 32X that would ditch the anime cutscenes, intro, and Red Book audio. Now, it's worth noting that this was the only source that I could find for this information, so there's a chance that what they're really talking about is Bloodletting, the cancelled follow-up to Rondo, but who knows?
And I know what you're thinking. Doesn't that basically already exist on the Super NES? And, well, the long short of it is no. But we're gonna get to that in a bit. Come on, do you really expect people to stick around? Nope. Well, only the coolest people will continue watching. Ugh, God, who writes this stuff? Oh yeah, we do.
Now that's not to say we eventually didn't receive it. It was brought overseas to North America and European markets, being added as a bonus to the PlayStation Portable exclusive in 2007 via Dracula X Chronicles. This is a remake of the game that has yet to be released to modern markets at the time of this video. A few years later, Rondo finally made its way to Nintendo fans via the Wii's Virtual Console in 2010. Anyways, Konami made the decision to release Rondo of Blood exclusively in their native land, something that the developers were very happy about. NEC's machine allowed Konami to create a much bigger game with more branching paths, levels, and bosses than previous games in the series, such as Castlevania III Dracula's Curse. Rondo of Blood features a grand total of 14 levels if you count the prologue, the 10 stages broken down between 5 alternates and 5 standard stages, then levels 6, 7, and then stage 8 for the finale with Dracula. Kicking things off, Rondo of Blood features a cutscene portraying a group of figures sacrificing a young girl to help Dracula rise again, all backed by a German voiceover? Wait, what? Now, it's worth noting that the PlayStation Portable version of the game that's on Dracula X Chronicles and the version that's on the Castlevania Requiem collection on the PlayStation 4 have brand new English dubs and subs where applicable.
Surely the blood of a beautiful woman will quench the thirst in my body.
Stay away from me!
What are you afraid of?
Finally, we can understand what the characters are saying. The vibe of these cutscenes certainly feels dated when it comes to the delivery of the lines, but as with Symphony of the Night's original audio, there's a certain charm to the dialogue here. I dig it. Once we creak open the coffin that is Rondo of Blood, we're given the haunting chorus of the song Requiem. Here is where the player setup occurs, allowing one of 3 save files in the game. These allow the player to keep track of their progress with finishing stages, change playable characters, as well as being given access to a sound test and stage select. I really love the freedom to be able to go back into the game and replay certain stages to be able to find more secrets. It's a wonderful addition to the franchise that I wish we saw more of later on, but with the shift into non-linear style for most of the games after this, it wouldn't have made much sense.
Now, I have many ways to capture the footage for this review, but I opted to primarily use the TurboGrafx Mini system, which has the original Japanese release, and the PlayStation 4 version of Requiem, which has Rondo of Blood in English on it. Yeah, I don't actually own the original Rondo of Blood release. I mean, who owns games when they don't own the console that they're played on? Okay, point taken.
Rondo of Blood's plot involves the resurrection of Dracula in 1792. His resurrector is a priest known as Shaft.
Who's the baddest, darkest priest in all Romania? Shaft! Damn right. Who's got the stones to kidnap young females in the name of Dracula? Shaft! Shut your mouth! What? I was just talking about Mega Weapon.
The story here is pretty simple. 19-year-old Richter Belmont heads off to Dracula's castle to save his girlfriend Annette, who is kidnapped by Shaft. In addition to Annette, there are 3 other girls scattered throughout the castle. A nun by the name of Tara, Iris, the local doctor's daughter, and the youngest girl, the feisty blonde, Maria Renard. Maria is a secondary playable character who utilizes magic to control animals. Once saved, Maria becomes playable. Her standard attack uses white doves that boomerang back to her in a swooping circle. Different sub-weapons can be gathered by whipping candelabras, as is the usual Castlevania fare. Maria's controls are much smoother than Richter's. She can also do more actions, such as a double jump and a slide, in addition to her pace and reaction time being faster. All 4 girls need to be saved to get the true ending for Rondo of Blood, which shows that, instead of Richter riding off alone, he has 2 horses in a carriage with the ladies presumably inside. What's also cool is, if you're playing as Maria, you get totally different cutscenes when rescuing someone or beating the game, which really helps inspire you to go through the game again. A little replay value is always appreciated. Unlike Richter's ancestors, he has the most fluid and limber movement up to this point in a Castlevania game. The jumping mechanics alone have changed tremendously. Though Maria will certainly show him up in the slick moves category, Richter can do full forward and backward leaps, along with a backflip triggered with a double tap of the jump button. Richter also has a hop that can be engaged by pressing a direction slightly after jumping. There's also a way to extend his whip slightly by pressing forward when the attack was implemented, but I hardly noticed that I was using it casually, and the difference is minuscule. He can also jump on stairs halfway and drop down below them if needed, though these features were also included in Castlevania Bloodlines, so I wonder if the development team shared ideas during development. Sub-weapons are back, with the Holy Water, Dagger, Cross, Axe, and Stopwatch all returning. Maria also has her own sub-weapons, with a running cat, protective turtle shell, powerful dragon, hatching eggs, rising cardinal birds, and a music book that produces attacking notes. In addition, there are 2 new ones for Richter: the key, used to open the locked doors to save some of the female prisoners, as well as the Bible, which encircles the player in a circular stream of pages. This is also called the Grimoire, or the Holy Book, depending on the game and the series, as well as the region. The sub-weapons are all triggered by pressing the up button and the attack button, which is standard fare for most of the earlier entries of the series. When playing the PlayStation 4 version, players can press the R1 button to trigger it instead, which felt a little smoother than up and attack to enable it. I tend to use the Axe, Holy Water, and Cross the most as Richter, and the Dragon as Maria. The Dagger is weaker than the Whip, but better for long-distance attacks, and the Bible only really got me through one area with minimal damage. I found the pocket watch to be insufficient compared to the previous games in the franchise due to it only slowing time down, not fully stopping it, a bit of a downgrade. My favorite change made in this game was sub-weapon swap-outs. If a sub-weapon was replaced either intentionally or accidentally, previous Belmonts were stuck with what they gathered until they came across the one they wanted. But in Rondo of Blood, the game allowed a brief ability to recapture a pickup that replaced the one that was lost. Just moving over the one that was dropped does this, and it's a much better sub-weapon system overall because of this change, especially when mistakes were made. New to the franchise are item crashes, again a feature that was added into the Castlevania Bloodlines entry as well. Using the sub-weapons and a large amount of hearts, Richter and Maria can both cause immense damage to enemies by pressing the select button on the controller. If no sub-weapons are equipped but sufficient hearts are present, Richter will use a flame whip attack and Maria will do nothing. Bummer. However, she does have a special move called Guardian Knuckle, which has her doing a special thrusting attack. Sadly, I could only get this to work once in my playthrough, and even that was by accident. According to an interview archived on Shmuppalations with the lead programmer, Nyaju, who I suspect is actually Toshiharu Furukawa, the initial plan for the game was to have 4 playable characters, a common trait within the franchise. The legacy of Castlevania III Dracula's Curse set the stage for future titles to have multiple playable protagonists, with games like Castlevania 64 also having 4 characters planned, then scrapped. I think it makes the experience more open-ended and exploratory, and it also gives a lot of replay value, yet it takes away the importance of the fight between the Belmont family and the main antagonist of Dracula. If Maria can beat Dracula, what does that say against the importance of things like the vampire killer and the Belmont lineage? I say this not to diminish the fun factor of a secondary playable character. After all, I had a blast playing through as Maria. Would one consider this to be a canon ending? Most likely not. But the developers weren't shy about hiding silly aspects of their personality into the Castlevania series. A perfect example of this is Akumadio Dracula Peke, which is a minigame unlocked in various ways depending on the format. Originally, this was used as a joke game if the wrong system card is plugged into the PC engine, but later releases featured it as a boss unlockable or via the Konami code. Requiem's release involves the latter of these, and it's pretty funny that the game pokes fun at the player for being a cheater. The stages here are full of variety, a clear focus of importance by the developers. Sure, there's the revisits to old haunts like Castlevania 1's first stage, the Clock Tower, and even a journey through the burning ruins of Castlevania 2's Town of Algebra. Couldn't resist the throwback to my Simon's Quest review. But there's tons of new levels, such as Stage 3's Chapel, Stage 4's alternate level, the Mountain Range, and Stage 5's alternate level, the Hidden Docks. Each level has a uniqueness to it, and while visually there's some impressive animations, I found that large chunks of the stages usually had flat backgrounds that were better indoors than outside. For example, look at the chapel's background compared to the simplistic hills and valleys of the Lake Bridge. The colors just don't really pop out here, and that's a shame because it's overall a well-animated game. It's been confirmed in interviews with a character designer by the name of Kuro, courtesy of an archived interview via Schmuppalations, that the PC engine had immense difficulty with the colors, so they intentionally designed backgrounds with, as he puts it, the least amount of colors possible. Despite Rondo of Blood's backgrounds taking a bit of a backseat this time around, the sprite animation is mostly top-notch. While the sides of the sprites generally shrink down as compared to Super Castlevania 4, I mean, just look at the red skeleton. Hey buddy, you doing okay? You look a little thin. Bad joke, I know. The sprites themselves have more fluid animation and in many ways are more detailed. There's a greater number of enemies as well, with each stage introducing new bad guys that would later be reused in games like Symphony of the Night, such as the pesky Axe Armor, Skeleton Apes, Knights, and Tusken Raiders. Sorry, Skeleton Gunmans.
Hey, that's what I always called them. Oh, come on, they totally look like Tusken Raiders from Star Wars. You know it's true.
Likewise, bosses were impressive to look at, all having their own unique intros as well as a new feature for the series, a last-ditched Hail Mary attack that can actually hurt and potentially kill the player. Overall, I found most of Rondo of Blood to be pretty simple for the basic challenges against enemies. The stages themselves provided less of a problem than the bosses, but if losing all your lives, you would have to start the stage over, which is standard fare for the franchise. The animated cutscenes have their ups and downs. I think my biggest issue is the style of the art here, which leans heavier into anime influences than previously in past games. Dracula, Richter, and Maria just kind of look off to me. Plus, there's this.
What's the cat's problem? He doesn't like you.
Is it because I said...
I don't like you either. Will you stop that? Sorry, couldn't resist Star Wars reference.
When bringing Castlevania games to North American markets, Konami developers had to design characters with an understanding that the more humanoid characters would have to be censored. Things like nudity, religion, or blood would be changed when coming to the West. So Rondo features all of these, and it's pretty glorious. This is the true vision for the franchise, and it's nice to see Konami's devs letting loose. Now, you know I love me some Castlevania tunes. So, Red Book audio-based songs with the typical Castlevania style is a bit of a no-brainer. This soundtrack was composed by Akira Shoji, Kaizo Nakamura, Tomoko Sano, and Mikio Saito, with guitar work by Motoaki Furukawa. It's worth noting that Mikio Saito specifically handled the returning themes for Vampire Killer, Beginning, and Bloody Tears, in addition to a stellar arrangement of Cross Your Heart from Haunted Castle that unfortunately didn't make it into the game. I think my biggest problem with the tunes in Rondo of Blood involves the floaty synths and off-key notes that lack the bite of the series. For example, in the song Slash. Organs and drums sound great in songs like Bloody Tears. And there's just so many layers. It's a soundtrack well worth revisiting time and time again. There's some tracks that actually utilize the HUC 6280 sound chip, such as Former Room. This plays right before the boss, and it is such a stark contrast to the other tunes, it throws me off every time. There's a few other songs that are like this, and because of that, it's not my favorite soundtrack by a long shot, but there are a ton of amazing songs. If I'm going to nitpick, I think these songs have sounded better elsewhere. I really like the dance trot of tracks like Cross of Fear. And the punchy funk of the drums and bass in this version of Den. Rondo of Blood was a critical success for Konami, but due to the failure of NEC systems overseas, there were no plans to bring it to the West at the time, at least in the form it was in. Konami knew they had done well and that the game deserved a Western release in some capacity. Supposedly, NEC had a rule in place that direct ports to competing systems were not possible due to exclusivity reasons. However, while researching this further, the sources for this information have been removed from the internet as far as I could tell. Either way, Konami decided to take the basic plot of Rondo of Blood, completely rebuilding the game with various assets taken from the PC Engine CD game. With the Sega Genesis getting Castlevania Bloodlines, and the latest entry on Nintendo consoles being 1992's Super Castlevania 4, Konami decided to bring one more Castlevania title to the Super Nintendo. Enter Dracula X. Initially considered being called Castlevania 5, Dracula X was released in July of 1995 in Japan as Akumajo Dracula XX, September 1995 in North America as Castlevania Dracula X, and June 1996 for European PAL regions as Castlevania Vampire's Kiss. Taking the basic plot of Rondo of Blood, Konami redesigned the game to play, look, and sound vastly different from its PC Engine CD counterpart, to the point that Dracula X really isn't the same game at all. Gone are the anime cutscenes, 2 additional prisoners to find, and secondary playable character, in favor of a game which shoots for traditional NES-style challenge over limitation-pushing progress. That's not to say the game isn't without some really impressive visual features. But before I get into that, here's a little personal history. I was an absolutely massive fan of Super Castlevania 4. The chunky sprites, amazing graphics, and Mode 7 effects on top of incredibly atmospheric music really pushed the boundaries of what a Castlevania game could be. And I've talked about that quite a bit in my Super Castlevania 4 review way back when. In my opinion, it set a specific standard for the series few games have matched. Being a Nintendo fanboy growing up, I was absolutely ecstatic about Dracula X being announced in Nintendo Power issue 72. I didn't know what a PC Engine was at the time, but all I cared about was that we were getting a new Belmont adventure on the SNES. I waited very patiently, stalking the pages of Nintendo Power, and when it was finally released in September of 1995, I didn't buy it.
All that build up for nothing. Sorry, guys.
In my defense, 1995 was an insane year for games. Yoshi's Island, Donkey Kong Country 2, Chrono Trigger all took over my life. Sadly, I never did own Dracula X back in the day. I didn't play it until the early 2000s when I was just starting to get into emulation, and this game came back into my radar.
But I own it now. Yeah, but that's a bootleg box. Excuse me. It's a reproduction. Thank you very much. And I do own the original card, I just don't have a box and manual for it. Sadly, it's just way outside my price range nowadays. You're out of my price range. Nice.
Starting up Dracula X, we're greeted with the sound of when life was magical.
Yep, anytime you heard that Konami jingle, you knew you were in for something amazing.
Replacing the anime cutscenes were still images, and I gotta be honest, this intro is completely butchered based on the original story.
Dude, the Middle Ages ended in 1500. They're saying Simon defeated Dracula hundreds of years prior? So what, Simon was really born in the 1300s? What is this nonsense? Yeah, Rondo of Blood and Dracula X take place in the 1700s, and Simon was born in 1669, so... yeah, somebody really messed up this localization.
Interestingly, Maria is labeled as Richter's distant relative in Rondo of Blood, but here she's considered Annette's sister?
I don't think it makes much of a difference. I mean, it makes more sense for Dracula to kidnap Maria if she's Belmont blood than Annette's sister, but I digress.
We get a nice creaky door and evil laughter once entering into a new game. Much like Super Castlevania 4, we get a map of the locations Richter will be visiting. In Rondo of Blood, thanks to the save file, Richter can go back into different stages in order to rescue the remaining captives and also discover every branching path. In Dracula X, there's only a password system, with a password being given out after each level's completion. I admit, Rondo's execution of branching paths requires the save states, but on Dracula X, the game's password system does justice to the style of gameplay just fine. And the password system is simple enough that it's not too daunting of a task to pick up later where you left off when stuck. Dracula X has a total of 9 stages, with 2 of those stages, 4 and 5, having alternate routes. One of my biggest issues with Rondo is that the branching paths aren't always obvious, but demand frequent leaps of faith if you don't know where to access them. Unlike Dracula X, which does a much better job of showcasing these thanks to simplicity. For example, in Stage 3, one of the hardest parts of the game is safely reaching the end of this long hallway filled with gaps between pillars. Enemies are placed to set players' expectations that falling into the pit is eventual, but making it to the end without defeat is rewarded. What's frustrating is, without save states, if you're trying to save both girls to get the good ending, you'd have to start the game over or use a password for the level so you could try it again. This drives up the frustration factor immensely when falling down these holes, but with enough practice and patience, it's able to be conquered. This is what makes Dracula X feel more like a classic NES entry in the series. Some would say this is artificially inflating the difficulty levels, and I can understand that perspective if you're going for a perfect ending run. Falling down the pit will get you to the Stage 4 alternate, which is the caves. However, successfully getting through the hallway will lead you to saving Maria by using the key subweapon. Going through the alternate door later in the level will take you to Stage 5's alternate, which is where Annette is being held. One interesting note is, unlike Rondo of Blood where you can face off against a nude Carmilla riding a giant skull and her servant Laura, Dracula X puts the unsaved Annette in the middle of the room, leading her to be transformed into Carmilla. Sadly, when defeating her, it doesn't save Annette, as that can only be done in Stage 5's alternate level. This also replaces the fight with death unless you save both girls prior to reaching the end of Stage 6, in which case, death will be your final boss fight before Dracula. Wanna know what's really bananas? You can't rescue just Annette. Yeah, In order to rescue Annette, Maria must be rescued first. I tried to use the key on the door, struggling all the way to the alternate stage route to save Annette without getting Maria first, and the door won't let me in. I thought this was a truly strange choice for the developers, but I'm thinking this was done on purpose so an additional end screen wouldn't need to be created. Stages are also incredibly different, and while there's less here than in Rondo, I think this game's backgrounds are more impressive than Rondo of Blood's. Stage 1's missing the journey through algebra, but these flame effects are super impressive for back in the day. Color schemes and backgrounds in stages like Stage 5's Alternate or Stage 6's Clock Tower, for example, really showcase a better use of visual design than in the PC Engine CD game. There's also a lot less leaps of faith and spots that lead to nowhere in Dracula X. What you see is what you get. Just because the stages look good doesn't mean everything else does. There's less enemies in Dracula X compared to Rondo of Blood, and the frames of animation here make the game run vastly inferior. Richter himself is very stiff and rigid, more so than in Rondo of Blood. While Richter could get hit back to back in Rondo by the same enemies, this doesn't happen nearly as often as it does in Dracula X, where enemies can double dip. This increases the difficulty and decreases the response time of Richter, who can often get frozen and interrupted from attacking. There are also more situations where using item crashes can actually kill you due to poor platform placement, and Richter's epic pose getting him in hot water. Because of this, I'd argue that Dracula X's difficulty is more artificial than Rondo's genuine challenge. If you die in Rondo, it's your own fault. If you die in Dracula X, it's most likely due to either stiffer controls, enemy placement, or awkward platform positions. What's clear here though is that the stages do not line up whatsoever. Almost every stage in Dracula X, aside from the first stage's atmosphere and certain boss fights, feels brand new. I like the idea of Stage 7 being a maze before getting to Dracula, but the boss battle with Dracula is a train wreck. The developers decided to increase the difficulty by making the final fight location have gaps in the floor, so my best advice to most players is to stay put in the safest initial corner of the room and just have killer timing. Once you realize you don't have to move much, the fight gets much easier. With that said, Dracula X's stage difficulty, unlike Rondo of Blood, is immense. Enemies do more damage than in Rondo of Blood, so Richter has his work cut out for him. Back to those item crashes, most of the sub-weapons are here with exception to the Grimoire Holy Bible book. The axe was my go-to in this game and it worked well during the final fight with Dracula. But as I mentioned earlier, the item crashes are a drop in quality. Instead of giant crosses, we're given a multi-shot of crosses that explodes from Richter. Definitely not as cool looking. Plus, when Richter engages the item crash ability, he does this leap into the air, which seems really awkward. Voice samples are much cleaner in Dracula X than in Rondo of Blood. A lot of the fuzziness is gone thanks to the excellent PCM sample abilities on the Super NES's sound chip. Now I realize music discussion is subjective to the taste of the individual, but man, Dracula X's soundtrack, in my opinion, is better than Rondo of Blood in almost all examples. The prime one for me is Stage 1's Divine Bloodlines. The funk guitar combined with the smoother synths really makes the Dracula X rendition my favorite version of this song. Here's a quick comparison. Additionally, the rest of the music in Dracula X is, well, excellent. Between the cheeky haunt of Vampire Killer, to the funky crawl of Op 13. Everything here just feels tighter and better fit. I'm not saying that Rondo's soundtrack is bad, not by any means. This is Castlevania we're talking about, people. I just think the chip-tuned versions of a lot of these songs wins out over the Red Book audio, and I realize I'm probably in the minority here. Before I wrap up, I wanted to comment on the art style in Dracula X. In Rondo of Blood, the game leaned into anime influences that would later be featured prominently in games like Dawn of Sorrow. But Dracula X seems to feature its own unique style, created by manga artist and illustrator Akihiro Yamada. While he's done art for games like Front Mission 3 and the Wizardry series, here his tone strikes as much more sinister. I love the darker style his art showcases, and prefer his blonde Annette to the purple-haired version in Rondo. His clothing design on Annette and Maria feels like it represents a more regal, romantic vibe, and I wish they put his art on the box for North America instead of the replicated Rondo of Blood art. Vampire's Kiss and Akamajo Dracula XX have killer boxes. There's no debate that the weakened hardware of the Super NES can't compete with the superior memory available via the PC Engine CD. But to call Dracula X a garbage port of Rondo of Blood couldn't be further from the truth. Both games have their positives and negatives. Sure, Dracula X has cheese-tastic difficulty aspects, an inaccurate lore when it comes to Maria's relation to the Belmonts, in addition to a jacked-up time frame for when the game takes place. Yes, it's got less frames of animation on sprites, fewer enemies and stages, stiffer controls, and nowhere near as many branching paths, plus a lack of animated cutscenes and less levels. But some of these are dead ends, and leaps of faith in Rondo can cause unneeded deaths and useless exploration. Dracula X is more in line with the original simplistic design style of levels, keeping the exploration minimal for purists of the classic Vania format. Couple this with the inferior backgrounds in the PC Engine CD title, more muffled sound effects, and awkward transitions between Red Book audio and chiptune songs, along with arguably inferior music. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's easy to poke holes in both renditions of Richter's games. Now, yes, there's a third game, Dracula X Chronicles, which we haven't covered. It's a remake of Rondo of Blood for the PlayStation Portable, but that's for another time. Today, my focus was entirely on the two original 16-bit titles. Between Dracula X and Rondo of Blood, we have two games with the same basic concept that offer two very different must-play adventures. As I mentioned in the beginning, both games have been re-released on Virtual Console, as well as the Castlevania Requiem Collection for Rondo and the Castlevania Advance Collection for Dracula X, so that you don't have to shell out thousands of dollars for original hardware and releases. So, which one should you go with?
Why not both? Bingo! That's what I've been trying to tell people all these years. Sadly though, all good things must come to an end. What are you doing? No, stop. You can't. You've served your purpose. I'm not the clone! I'm not the clone! Ugh! Ow! Oh. No, please. You can't do this. I'm not the clone. No.
Rated M for mature.
Ha! Fooled you! Yep, I was the real one the whole time. Can't believe we went with another clone-based storyline. Man, really gotta start diversifying this stuff more often. Oh, video call.
So, how did the latest clone work out for you?
So close! But in order to really make this skit redundant, we may have to do the experiment a third time.
Well, that is going to cost you extra.
Good thing you're my go-to scientist and therapist. Who knew that was a thing?
So, how are you going to end this one?
With the most terrifying thing of all. A link to the Patreon! Happy Halloween!
Thanks to all Patreon members, but especially the Morningstar Whip tier and up. They are Bryce, Nintenjo, Venthros, Technicolor Dojo, Sam Schaefer, Scott McElhone, Trevin Adams, and Derek Demitter. Your support really helps with each and every review. If anyone is watching this and wants to help, feel free to join in the link below. For those who want to help in other ways, sharing the review on your social media really means a lot, as my channel has and always will be sponsored by viewers like you. Thanks for watching. Want more Dude You Haven't Played This Game? Check out the videos on the screen. Or head to my channel and grab the full playlist of reviews and retrospectives. I'll see you on the next Dude You Haven't Played This Game.